There could be thousands of people around the planet from that one action who are being interfered with, and it originates from one entity, one being. We think it's multiple millions and millions of demons here and there and everywhere. No, it can be one. Throughout all time zones or throughout all time periods, it could originate from one because of a deal that was done, an esoteric occult practice.
So what really lurks behind the veil separating this world from the next? Are we being controlled by sinister beings? Is there hope that we're also being protected by something good? Sounds like a classic case of good versus evil, and while many people may consider it a fable, there is evidence when you look close enough that there's more to this than we might think. Barry Fitzgerald co-wrote The Deception of Gods and Men with Brian Allen, and he joins us now to discuss it. Hi Barry, how are you?
Dean, thanks very much for having me on. Everything's great, I have to say.
Fantastic. Well, the book recently came out, so what's the message in that book?
Well, I think the main message, Dean, is to question what is communicating with us, question and challenge what is coming across through the veil to reach us on this side. And that in itself, time and time again, we see this level, an exceptional level of deception that is played. And when we track this particular phenomenon, we tend to see it taking particular personas, if you like, or masks, which in itself just aids to confuse the situation, confuse us in particular. But for Brian and I, what we ended up doing is we had to stop looking at the way that they appeared to us. Rather, what we had to do was to look at the phenomena in the way that the phenomena interacted with us, because by that then we were able to track it. When the problem is, Dean, that when we try and track it by the appearance, that appearance in itself can change sometimes twice in a generation. But like I said, the phenomena itself, the way it interacts, remains the same. I'll give you an example. For instance, this idea within ufology that we will have missing time. That is a common occurrence, of course, reported by people who have experienced the phenomena. You also have this mischievous nature. Abduction, another one. Mutilation, of course, has also been associated there. And this high level of deception. Now, that's just a small example of the crossover that we tend to find with this phenomena, because we also find that list of phenomena and the side effects of that phenomena crossover into the earth spirit realm. And we would, within Ireland, of course, we would commonly see them as being fairies. But you cross over into the Middle East and you'll find the jinn. They do the same. The old gods were doing the same. And so the more we push back, the more we find that this phenomena pushes all the way back into Babylon. And that's where we lose the trail. We just don't have any more written text beyond Mesopotamia. And that in itself is a problem. But in itself, that's what we've been doing is tracking the phenomenon and seeing the way that it interacts with us. What's this message, this broken record that seems to keep going around and around and around? It's us versus them. That particular story is just something that seems to come around time and time and time again. And I don't know what it is about us, in that we seem to have this ability to forget what our ancestors had encountered. Because this story is played out to us again and again and again. Granted, the masks are different, but the story in its core remains the same. Like as you said, good versus evil, angel versus devils, and Greys versus the Palladians. All this particular story serves to pull us in and bait us, if you like, and that is a serious problem, because we need to find our grounding. We need to start challenging, what are you, and how are they interacting? Because I have seen this time and time again, when put into practice, when we make solid contact and we become suspicious of that contact because of something that just wasn't quite right, it shoots, it's gone. And that in itself should speak volumes. That, well, why, if you're just wanting to clarify something, that suddenly, oh, we're out, we're gone. They do not like to be questioned. You have to believe it 100%, even if it tells you the sky is red when it's blue. If we challenge that, then we tend to find things start backing off, and sometimes that retreat can be sudden.
Yeah. So you're saying, in effect, that the world we live in is an illusion, and if it is, how could it possibly be created?
The world in itself that we're living in, I don't believe is an illusion. The illusion is coming from what is interacting with us within the world of the paranormal, within ufology, and a lot of the fringe research fields. We need to realize that, by pigeonholing the phenomena and locking it to that particular research field, we didn't see the bigger picture, in that we are also in other fields experiencing the same thing, but it's being recognized as being something different. And by pigeonholing the phenomena, it has served actually to help this deception. So we need to band together. We need to share the information. We need to recognize the information, and we really should be tackling this as a combined unit moving forward, to see this particular deception that is coming through that veil.
Yeah. So why us? Why humanity? Why is humanity being played like this?
Your guess is as good as mine. What we do speculate, we put the hypothesis through that these particular things coming back from beyond, from the void itself, need an anchor to stay here, and we are the anchor. There was a comment, or maybe last week or the week before, someone happened to make this mention that he who has the body wins. And when these things come back, what we were seeing is that they needed to hook us through that hook and bait, and because they can only stay here for a limited amount of time if they're not attached to us on that spiritual level, and if they fail to have that attachment, they're forced back into that particular void. So it pays to reduce our suspicion, our defenses, if you like, because the body itself is remarkable, absolutely remarkable at detecting these particular things. Our ability to discern the nature of this particular phenomenon is second to none. But we live in a society now, especially a global society, where what we eat interferes with the way our body actually works on a biological level to discern these particular entities, and that again causes a real problem. But when you find that balance, and this is what it comes down to, is finding balance within ourselves. When we do that, going into, for instance, the likes of a haunted location, or a site that's known for this high level of high strangeness, you can really work very, very well And no matter what image, no matter what appearance it takes, you can easily work through that, and see, okay, and understand the signals coming through the body, that this is what it says it is, or you get that little alarm bell, this isn't right. And that's an important thing that we need to try and connect back to. And the technology, unfortunately, serves to lock us out of that.
Yeah. Are you discounting the fact that that flesh and blood aliens are actually visiting Earth and doing this, or is this from entities already on the planet and just hidden away?
You see, this is where we really now start challenging the ideas of old, that these things were traversing through the gulf of space to reach us. Because when we start pushing back into our history, we find, for instance, in the likes of appearances such as we'll know them as the shining ones, or the bright ones, their appearances really speak volumes within our history. And that particular history is easily discovered. In fact, I was pulling research from the Marian Library, the International Marian Research Institute in Dayton, Ohio, and they have a listing of appearances of when the shining ones appeared, for instance, throughout the last century. And pulling on that, we can see this crossover, and which stretches all the way back. And it's important to remember that when the bright ones or the shining ones appear, they tend to appear usually around rocky outcrops, or cave systems, or just stone plateaus. And again, we get this very unusual crossover from David Paulides in Missing 411. And David has confirmed as well that the majority of people that go missing in rocky boulder fields. And so again, we're getting back to this element of the rock. What is it about the rock? Which is something we should come back to. But these shining ones, we can understand the nature of the shining ones within the first 20 seconds. And within the Marian Institute, with all these listings, we can go back through and see where these things are appearing, and understand the premise in which they are appearing. I'll give you one example. Back in 1981, there was an appearance in Eastern Europe where this shining one appeared, and children were there, and they witnessed her appearance, or its appearance. But within the first 20 seconds, the information was vital to record. The children were frozen stiff with fear. Now that spoke volumes. That without a shadow of a doubt was indicating the nature of the being itself. And this aspect of our fight or flight is part of our instinct. And that's something we really need to get back to. Now, with this image, this appearance, we also seen, of course, this crossover with the children in the playground in Zimbabwe. Because again, within the first 20 seconds, the children were afraid. And that particular initial contact is the trigger to allow us to understand it. Now, if we go back into the likes of Babylon, there's a wonderful book there written by Jeremy Black and Anthony Green, in which they're able to pull information from the tablets, the cuneiform tablets, that speak of gods, these shining ones that wore melam and exuded ni, and melam was a light that was terrifying and awe-inspiring. It froze you to the spot, whilst ni was described as a creeping of the flesh. So these particular things have been about thousands and thousands of years and interacting with us. Again, we can't go back any further than that because our historical records are just simply not there. But that's as far as we were able to push it back. I would love to have pushed it back a little further, but we just can't.
Yeah. about the alien abduction phenomena? Are they real?
Yes,
I'm convinced that it's happening.
yes, there is an element to that, which again, you know, I'll give you an example of a particular girl I was speaking to in Scotland, and she had this encounter in which they entered the room. She was in the top of a series of apartment blocks, and they came in, and she was pinned to the bed. She couldn't move. She had this encounter. They told her all this wonderful stuff, and which was pretty run of the mill. And she said it lasted for around 20 minutes, and then they left. And she says it was a wonderful experience. And I listened to her, and then she said, she finished off with, you know, I thought it was funny that the cat had peed itself in the bed. Now there was the key. And it was something that she failed to recognize, because although we can be fooled, the animals are quicker to pick up on these things than we can. The cat was terrified. So that spoke volumes. It was something that within seconds she had completely swallowed the hook and bait, and that was allowed to happen. The abductions and the mutilations, yes, this is all part of it. And in fact, what we were able to see with the mutilations, and this is something that I worked with Steve Mira, is this need to try and work through the immune system. And they were targeting areas within the animals that really played with the immune defenses. And so they were targeting the mucous membranes, the ports in which you enter the body. So it was interesting to see, and how as well, that those particular mucous membranes were activated primarily through fear. So during this extreme aspect of the abduction, the mucous membranes go into overdrive, and this is what was being harvested from a lot of the animals there, which again was suggesting that there was something they were really keen on investigating, this element of the immune system for some bizarre, strange reason. But yeah, it is part of it. It's something we have to accept. And also, I have to say that again, like the abduction scenario, where you have this case where the people are pinned to their beds, for instance, a lot of people would say, well, that's just the aspects of the mind shutting down, or the brain shutting down, and you know, the side effects of that. But this was something different that we were looking into. It wasn't that particular scientific formula that really set neatly for skeptics to say, well, this is what it is. Because I have been speaking to people who their partners have been attacked while they were in their beds, as they lay watching. They lay perfectly still. This was not a hallucination of the partner, because they were clearly awake. They were able to watch it. But the moment they moved, that's whenever the attack was broken off, and they left. Now, again, going back through history, we find that this aspect of this particular type of attack, this can be related to the incubus and succubus, those old demons of old, and back further again. But we should point out that 9 times out of 10, those attacks happen to women more than men. And they also happen when the iron count is low in the body. Now, historically, we tend to see, especially from a Celtic perspective, we tend to see iron as being the defense against the fairy, against the jinn, and all this other stuff. But isn't it interesting that these things attack when the iron count is low, when the women enter their monthly cycle? That's when they strike out, and they do what they do. So yeah, it was interesting to see that was still happening, and how it happens. Part of it is physical, and there's also another part of it which seems to be almost, and I don't want to use the word spiritual, but it is within that realm that there's a part of it also which falls into that realm. And what we started to see and hypothesize is that yes, there was a physical element to it, but there was also this element in which they were withdrawing part of us from the body. And we believe that it was actually this aspect of the soul that they were targeting and they were pulling out. Because within the book, we describe that the soul itself is the seat to the psychic abilities. All the body's psychic abilities are the seat of the soul. And the soul's job, we hypothesize, is to keep this meat sack alive as long as possible to allow the spirit to experience. So when you go through this severe encounter, and many times we don't remember it, thank God, but for those that do remember, suddenly they start developing these strange abilities that they didn't normally have before, and they see them as gifts from the Shining Ones or whoever it was came through. But what we're hypothesizing is that these are not gifts. These are part of us. It is our soul that is stepping forward to the plate and actually trying to create a situation in which we don't end up in that scenario again. It's an attempt to try and keep us safe. Yeah, so that would be our take on the abductions, both physical and, yes, there is that element to it which lies within that element of the ether.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the soul, because one experiencer I talked to in the last 18 months, and he's basically in full-time hiding, has been hounded constantly and taken by a group of greys.
Oh, yeah, yes.
And the message they gave him is, well, he asked them, well, why do you keep doing this to me? And they told him that they're interested in our soul. They're trying to harvest our soul. They haven't found a way of separating it from our physical makeup.
Now, if he wants a cure for that, which no doubt he probably would, wear an iron amulet. It sounds like he's low on iron, and if he wears an iron amulet around the neck, that will stop. And I know that because of firsthand experience with the Greys. They are terrified when we can move. They can't shut us down completely when there's iron in our presence. That in itself, this aspect of iron goes way back. You know, from an Irish perspective, we would have used iron on the cribs to protect the children before baptism. We would have used iron within the barns of our farms to protect the animals from mutilation. And so iron was always this key thing. Even this idea of the evil eye was warded off by wearing an iron pin. So this element has always worked, and I have seen it firsthand, my own personal experiences at wearing it when there was an encounter with the Greys, and they were horrified, they were terrified that I could move, and they made no progress. And that was an experience and a half, I have to say.
Yeah. What about the over the years we've seen some horrible mass suicides around the world, perpetrated by people who claim to receive messages and then given a roadmap to follow, and most of the time, they'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of followers, and suddenly we end up with a mass suicide. Is that part of this deception?
The problem is, again, we need to question what's coming through, and these are perfect examples of it not being followed through, and we accept things at first hand. There are two particular elements around the planet where we tend to find these liminal places, and we tend to find there's one particular group, and this is where we get back to this one side against the other. We tend to find these liminal places number one, in positive magnetic anomalies, where you will also find the likes of UFOs appearing, cattle mutilations, disappearances, poltergeist activity, the usual run-of-the-mill high strangeness. But on the other side, you have these places that again were associated with the enemies of the ones who were in the positive anomalies. But that's also the place where we tended to find the places of worship for these old gods, where there was an element of sacrifice that was being instilled within the area. Now, moving forward, we were able to see that up to 75% of the world's top suicide locations also appear in these negative anomalies. So this is not by chance that people are being drawn to these areas to end their lives. And of course, that leads into another area, which is really does reflect where we are today, unfortunately, and certain elements of our corporations and business and everything else that are involved with communicating with these things beyond the veil. But the price for communicating with them for advancement and for wealth and for material objects is exceptionally high. And that reflects back on the old days of blood worship and things like that.
Yeah. And that brings up an interesting point. And I've always wondered, I've asked this question numerous times and had different responses, but get two people side by side, given the exact same opportunities in life, both driven, yet one successful and one isn't. I mean, and we talk about some people having a charmed life. I mean, is there a possibility that somewhere along the line they've made a deal with the devil, so to speak?
Well, funny you should say that, actually. We were discussing this just the other day, and because there was this, we tended to see this unusual phenomena, for instance, the nighttime attacks that would attack particular families, and activity would follow family lines. And one of our doctor colleagues, he says, but that makes no sense, because if you go back 8 generations, we're so mixed that it's impossible to follow that family line. You know, where does that go? And what we speculate, we says, well, wait a minute, possibly we're looking at this the wrong way around, because these particular things, in their truest sense, not the ones that we create, not the archetypes that we create, not the nuts and bolts crafts that we are building from black budgets and everything else, but the real raw phenomena. If we turn this idea of it running through the family line on its head, we actually track it back to a particular source, because the phenomena can be conjured, it can be summoned. And I mean from an esoteric occult practice. It can be summoned. So when we turn it on its head and go back to the point of when it was summoned, the family bloodline has been offered up, which means that bloodline disperses as it goes along. There could be thousands of people around the planet from that one action who are being interfered with, and it originates from one entity, one being. We think it's multiple millions and millions of demons here, there, and everywhere. No, it can be one. Throughout all time zones, or throughout all time periods, it could originate from one because of a deal that was done, an esoteric occult practice. So it was something, you know, it was something really to consider, and especially whenever we sit back and we look at the phenomena as it is today. We have people that will sit in circle and try and communicate and get the responses from these things in the sky, and these flashy lights that appear and have been known to appear. You know, excuse me, I've had my own encounters with them. But saying that, when we go back and we look at this particular phenomena, the idea of sitting in circle, the idea of lifting a voice recorder and saying, is there anyone there? Call it for what you want. I don't care. But you must recognize that that is an esoteric practice in its fundamental, basic beginnings. That is an occult practice. Is there anyone there? Can you come forward and give me? You're drawing this thing to you, and from today, you know, we're told that if you want anything from the universe, you can put it out there and do what you're doing and put it back. Again, that is an esoteric practice. 20 years ago, it was we were told it was a phenomenon that was reported in a book called The Secret.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it wasn't necessarily a secret, because if we go back 2,000 years, it was known as Grinholt here by the Druids. It was the same phenomena, but for some bizarre reason, we keep renaming the damn thing. And that in itself helps lose that within time. And we lose the warnings that come with that for using that particular occult practice. And the problem is that when we do make contact, we open that doorway, we open that stargate, that portal, that vortex, call it whatever you want. You open that to allow that in. Very rarely do we close that door.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of teams, and I've seen it time and time again, a lot of teams who are investigating are in it for giggles. And they go into a property, and this process begins, and they make contact, and then they leave. And that has left that door open. And even though maybe they didn't get anything within the first 2 hours, but within the next 2 days, or the next 2 weeks, or the next 2 months, there possibly something may actually come through that particular element that has been left open. And in itself, it is a form of intent that has created the problem. The intent behind that to make contact, the intent to make contact with these things from the sky, in itself can create all sorts of problems. There was a group of contactees back in the 1970s. They were from the University of Indiana, and they went through this process of making contact, and they got the flashlights, and they made contact, and these lights above their heads were flashing back. Pretty normal UFO stuff. However, what happened is that the phenomena that began interfering with them became very, very intense, and was very, very similar to that was recorded by the scientists in the Livermore laboratories in the United States, who around the same time period were also having their experiences in broad daylight. And that would include manifestation of body parts, strange creatures that would appear, objects being moved, knocks and bangs in the walls, poltergeist phenomena, hauntings, call it what you will. All this mad phenomena that was happening, this high strangeness, it's circumvented around this initial contact, this want, this draw, this esoteric practice to draw it forward. Now, what happened, of course, is that it led them to this point where they had to stop. Exactly the same as the Livermore laboratories. Unfortunately, it didn't go so well for some of the group. There was some that had just disappeared, vanished off the face of the earth. And now I would assume they're somewhere there, maybe out in the desert or something like that. But one committed suicide. There was another turned to religion, and one, I believe, ended up going to the occult path, which in itself is not bad. You know, occult just means hidden. But within certainly within the religious perspective, it was demonized.
Yeah.
But we have to recognize for what it is, and we have to accept some responsibility for this as well.
Yeah. It seems to me that these things, beings, whatever they are, need an invitation. They need to be invited in.
Yes, there is a certain amount of that is definitely there. The attachment itself can be a problem, because sometimes it is unwarranted. But when the attachment is is given enough time. And that's where the problem lies, is when it's given enough time, it creates this symbiotic or symbiosis. And it's subtle, so subtle. And its will and its wishes and its want start to creep in. And this can last for years, this subtle maneuvering into place. But yeah, that in itself can be very, very bothersome. But there are points in which these elements can enter and take over. Call it possession, call it what you want. But there are also esoteric practices out there that can also do the same. The Romanian witches over in Eastern Europe are very well versed in practices that target the shadow, target the soul, and they can work on that. Now, of course, that gives some credence to voodoo and things like that, but there for the practitioners of the esoteric path, some very good ones. There is a practice there in which they can transfer the soul to another. And this is exactly what's happening coming from the veil, only they're not going back to that. They're staying here, anchoring here, and then anchoring onto the next subject. They tend to target a member of the family, and it would have to be a male heir. I don't know why a male heir, but it's male, and no more than 10 years of age. Now, the acceptance of this can be so simple from an esoteric path. The practitioner, of course, knowing that death is imminent, will bring the child in and give them the gift. Can be a pencil, something so simple, and that in itself then, of course, is the anchor for that to happen. And at point of death, then the soul is said to transfer over, and when that happens, then it will start to enthuse itself onto that particular unit, the trinity, if you like, of that particular child, and push and force in its wishes, its wants, and forcing the shadow or the natural soul of the child out. And it was interesting that Aleister Crowley, the occult practitioner in the United Kingdom, when he was dying, his son came to see him, who was 10 years of age, and 2 weeks after, the young boy started experiencing symptoms similar to schizophrenia after Aleister's death. So I do wonder, was Aleister that bad that he would do that to his own son? It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, you make, going back to a couple of points earlier, these beings are working with people in power, which is a frightening prospect. Are we talking like, I mean, you mentioned corporations. What about people in power in politics?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And this idea that this notion that a lot of folks, of course, would say, oh, that doesn't happen. That's ridiculous. The people are not meeting in secret and having these ceremonies that make contact with those beyond. Well, I have an example of that in a document which comes from the Douglas Aeronautics Company that was formerly in the United States before it was bought over by Boeing. And in 1968, the Douglas Aeronautics Company were sent some of its funding to engineers who were using Ouija boards to contact aliens to try and get advancements in engine design.
Wow.
Now, that in itself, there were red flags all over the document. I'm looking at it going, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. And for some reason, they just do not see it. It seems that once they become absorbed in this interaction, they want this interaction, and they forget, they seem to be blinded by the contradictions that are coming. But there was one thing of real importance that came from these particular meetings and these encounters, is that the variety of conversations that they were having with these beings, they touched on topics that covered sociology, government, economics, warfare, crime, and engineering and science. Now, if we go back to the Greek times, we find that there were areas there where the priests, the priestly elite, and the kings, the rulers, were also going to these particular sacred areas, and having commune with these beings from the other side that were known as the Word. And the Word gave them information on topics such as sociology, government, economics, warfare, crime, medicine, engineering, and science. The exact same thing. Now, today, we tend to find a lot of the secret societies are involved heavily within this. But as I said, the payment is exceptionally high. And what do they get from this? Power, feeds an ego, and wealth. But it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. That's the world we live in.
Yeah.
And
but does your research indicate that there is a payback system for being given this power and success in life?
Yeah, like I said, with the appearance of the shining ones, the bright ones, what I was able to see is that 10 years before, in the last century, a decade before major war broke out, these things appeared more so than anywhere else in negative magnetic anomalies. The places where the bloodletting of old happened. But a decade before each of the major wars, we're talking World War I, World War II, the global war on terrorism was another one, the Korean War, all those particular wars, a decade before, the Shining Ones were going absolutely crazy and appearing in all these different areas. But keeping in mind this idea of sacrifice, isn't it interesting that we also find over 70% of the world's weapons development and manufacturing also happens in negative magnetic anomalies? That in itself is not by accident. And what do those weapons do? They spill blood, huge amounts of it. So the payment gets higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, I've taken a real interest, huge interest actually, in near-death experiences and also pre-death experiences, but NDEs. Let's talk about the afterlife then. I mean, these people are saying they die and then they get a dose of what it's like on the other side. I mean, is that an illusion, or is that something you've proven it doesn't happen?
Usually what tends to happen, you see, Dean, is that what we were saying is at a point of death, we indicated before that there was the spirit. And in today's environment, we use the soul and spirit as a very interchangeable terminology, but that was never meant to be the case. And certainly we recognize that at point of death, the spirit is poof, it's gone. Now the soul lingers for hours to days, to maybe even weeks, around the body before it moves off. Now there is a very interesting accounts that come from the Nordic countries, and a lot of our Neolithic history, our Neolithic spirituality and understandings certainly come down through there. Initially they came from the Nordic countries and into the top of Scotland there, and then filtered down and through us, and then, of course, eventually building Stonehenge and things like that. But they believe that your spirit returned to this particular place. Now, they described it as green valleys, flowers, and all this wonderful stuff. And there was people there, and there was happy times, and you went through these gates to get into these places. And that place in itself was it was like a bus station, because that's when the spirit then was moved on to where it needed to be. And now, we never tracked any of the phenomena of the spirit. We just left it there because we recognized, okay, the spirit's there, that's fine. What we were interested in was the aspect of the soul, the shadow. But this idea of these green valleys and everything else would sit very nicely with the Christian belief of heaven. However, in the Nordic countries, it was known as hell. Now, our idea of hell has been infused because of Greek traditions, looking at the likes of Hades and things like that. So it became very muddy from the Christian perspective, and where that was all coming from in the Middle East and stuff like that, because what we were seeing from the Nordic countries and down through the Neolithic, which were way pre-Christian, thousands of years before Christianity, is that the soul, or the spirit, went to hell, and there was a goddess there called Hela, and then you went on to where you were going. The soul, however, went to the void, and that was the place of nothing, and absolutely nothing. And they believed that before the bodies were brought to these receptacles of the soul, if you like, these sacred places, the soul broke free from the body, and it went through a stage of metempsychosis, which is a change of appearance. So it changed from what we would know it as and into a serpent before it returned to the void. So a lot of these particular places of old, where we tended to find the receptacles of the soul, we tended to find elements of the serpent there as well, because it was the serpent who was giving over the information from the other place. And this idea of serpent and receptacle, we see within the Akkadian wall art depictions from Mesopotamia, because we may remember that some of these depictions of the gods are holding what looks like a handbag or a basket. That particular basket is the receptacle of the soul, and we see that within one of the mass chambers there in the Mediterranean, which in itself is carved as the basket. So those were places. Those were the liminal places in which we could reach the shadow. We could reach the soul and learn information that was kept in the void, or the global consciousness, or the Akashic records. There are many different names for it.
Right. In the book, you talk about the world being in a precarious position between two evils of the same making. Who are they, and who made them?
That's beyond our pay grade. As to who they are, they are part of us. And this idea that they come back through the void to attach to us, they need to get back to here. And for those that accept the shadow, of course, lives are good for them, and wealth and everything else is secured. But there comes a time when the meat suit finally gives out. So either they go through the process of swapping over, or try and find someone else, or they return to the void. And there's a huge majority of them don't want to return to the void. This aspect of the soul itself, yes, it's there to protect us, but left unkept, it becomes very problematic. If an imbalance is allowed to happen, it becomes really, really problematic, because the soul itself deals with our wants, our wishes, our needs to keep alive, and very, very basic instincts So that in itself, of course, we see reflected from the void when we have some dealings with these particular things that that can be very, very dark. And let's face it, there's nothing darker in this universe than than a human soul left unkept.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting indeed. So I guess without good, you can't have evil, or you wouldn't recognize evil, and vice versa. So, I mean, we've basically been talking about evil during most of this interview. I mean, is there something out there that's actually looking out for us and protecting us?
There is, we have had great encounters with things that are there that have been helping, and we shouldn't fail to recognize the spirit either, because the spirit is that aspect of experience, and then goes back to wherever it goes back to. Some people say it goes back to the source, it goes back to the creator, whatever the case may be. I don't know. That was something that we left alone. And just recognized it for what it was, and because our intention was to what's coming through the veil, what's creating the deception, and recognizing that for what it is, to allow us to get back a balance, to allow us to understand what was coming through and how we can detect it, and more appropriately, how we deal with it whenever we are going toe to toe with it.
Hmm. You spoke about iron earlier on as a way of protecting yourself. What about a spiritual weapon? Is there a spiritual weapon that people can use? The name
I
of
have personally, I have never encountered it. A lot of what is written in the book is definitely from our own experiences, and pulling on wisdom from our ancients. Iron is part of that. And before that, before the development of iron, there was also meteoritic iron, which was highly valuable within places like Egypt and everywhere else. But I don't know about the spiritual defense. The problem is, you see, when we start going into this again, we start changing names and intentions behind particular spiritual practices, and the weaknesses of that can be shown, for instance, within it was a practice that Aleister Crowley was actually doing when this particular being was summoned through from the void, and made his appearance in his area that he had created, this safe space for it to appear in within the triangle. It simply stepped out over the triangle and beat the crap out of him. So those things change, and the reason that they're changing can be anybody's guess. But I prefer to look at something that historically has been shown to work, rather than something that we have experienced within a particular 5 or 10 year period that hasn't got longevity. And tracking back that spiritual aspect has to have longevity. And if we keep changing the appearance and name of it, it makes it very, very difficult to track. And see how effective that can be. That would be the issue that I would have with the spiritual aspect to it. But I'm not saying that there isn't one. No doubt there possibly is. I just haven't come across it.
Right. We're moving into a time of AI. How does artificial intelligence, how is it tied up in all of this?
What we tended to see is this migration of this phenomena and its interference within our technology, and the likes of computers, cell phones, and things like that. We were seeing cameras that can all be interfered with and also utilized to its advantage. If we're to consider that the meat suit, if you like, us, is fallible, then for them to stay here longer, they're going to need something a little bit more secure. Now, if we can see a movement within the technology there is a distinct possibility that there is a player here being moved for the AI. We have to recognize that the human race itself is already on the decline. Forget pandemics, forget the wars and everything else. We're already in the decline. We didn't need any assistance with that. So maybe this is a ploy on their part to make that shift to the AI technology. AI technology in itself is not bad. I believe it has its positives, but the AI technology is not the problem. It's what's going into the AI technology is the problem, because as I said, that can harness and harvest and host the worst of us, and that's a problem. Because at what point does the AI realize that it's possessed?
Yeah.
And so that's something that we really need to sit down and think about.
Yeah. All right. Last question. We spoke about near-death experiences, about UFO believers, alien people believing in flesh and blood aliens. So, do you get pushback from people with these beliefs, from NDEs, from contact experiences on what you're talking about in the book?
If I'm to be truthful, Dean, no, I don't. I know others who do, but for Brian and I, we haven't. And believe me, we've been waiting on it. But to date, it hasn't happened yet. Maybe if the movie comes out, we might.
Right. Yeah. Well, Barry, great talking with you. Some food for thought. In fact, a lot of food for thought here. You've almost shattered my belief in the afterlife.
Sorry about that.
I was getting pretty excited about that, but I guess back to the drawing board. But anyway, the book is called The Deception of Gods and Men. Brian Allen co-wrote it with you. Brian, of course, is he the publisher of the Phenomena magazine?
He is indeed, yes, based in Scotland.
Great. I'm aiming to get Brian on and have a chat with him about the topic as well. But it's great to talk to you today. And
thank you very much.
Have you got a follow-up coming up to this?
I am working on another book. It's called the Fruit of the Gods, which looks at what our Neolithic brethren were doing and how they were making contact with these things beyond the void, and how that came across from the Fertile Crescent into what we have here today.
Right.
We have chambers here in Ireland that predate the Great Pyramids of Giza.
Wow.
And they were built by and supported by efforts from the Fertile Crescent, and we've uncovered a particular species of tree that may have been used by the originators of these stone, huge stone tombs, that may have actually aided in this ability to commune, because there was something very, very important that seemed to be happening within these chambers when it was time to commune with these particular beings. And there were specific times to do it. You just didn't walk in off the street. They did not want to speak to stupid people, so you ate or drank of this particular fruit, and it raised everything. So they were able to commune with us on all levels.
Yeah. People can obviously buy the book, but is there somewhere else they can go to follow your research?
Yes, they can find me on Facebook, or they can pop across to my website. It has to be updated though, charmstealer.com. But primarily they can find me on Facebook and have a chat there if they so wish.
Okay, Barry, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean.
Barry Fitzgerald joining us today.